And so for 30 miles, you are hiking through waters that are infested with alligators, pythons, cottonmouths, and every other ugly critter you could ever possibly want to have. And you hike that in January and February because they're still there, but they're a little bit more dormant. You know, they're not quite so aggressive. They want to sleep. They don't want to be harassed by some idiot hiking through their waters. So this is basically the trail. I don't know if you can see it, but right there is orange paint. And so what you're looking for is orange paint that tells you you are on the trail. So basically, this is me hiking along. But this is one of the shallow areas. But on this particular day, I'm on a 30-mile section of hike. And in that 30 miles are 2 islands. They're about 50 feet across, and it's the only dry place in the entire 30 miles. So you've got to make it to one of those islands to sleep. Otherwise, you can't put a tent up. So I was hiking all day long, and the deeper it was, the more difficult it was to move my legs. And I reached the point where I could not take one more step. I was exhausted. I couldn't sit down. As you can tell, there were no seats out there. And I don't know what told me to stop, but I stopped at this moment. I stopped. This is the trail. There's cypress trees on both sides. And I just stood there trying to rest, not being able to sit down, closed my eyes, and just kind of sat there and waved back and forth. And when I opened my eyes, the mud was settling. Because it's very clear water. It's spring water or rainwater, and you can see all the way to the ground. There's silt on the bottom and limestone, which is very dangerous because you slip off it. So the silt was settling when I opened my eyes, and when I looked down, there was an oak tree that had come down, you know, from years of being underwater, and it had fallen right in the trail. So it was in the same direction of the trail. I was hiking Nobo. Nobo is northbound. Sobo is southbound. I was walking Nobo, and there's the tree in the perfect spot. I'm going to walk on this tree, and for a couple steps, I'm not going to have mud in my boots. What a great moment this will be. But I didn't want the tree to roll on me, because I knew if it rolled, I was going to fall into the swamp and be submerged in this mess. So I took my hiking stick, and I reached out, and I poked the tree in order to make sure that it wasn't going to roll on me. And when I did, 2 huge legs went back, and I looked down, and I could see a tail that was at least 4 feet long, a body that was another 4 or 5 feet long. He went back a couple little steps, stopped, and when I measured him out, because I just stood there and froze, when I looked down, I realized that his head was at my left foot. If I had taken one more step, I would have stepped on his front foot. So I froze. My gut said, run like you know what, and I froze. And the reason I froze was because the day before I'd walked through some shallow water, and as I was walking along, something reached up and bit me in my right calf. It grabbed my calf, it hurt so bad, and I didn't know what it was. I panicked, and I ran. I made it one step, slipped off limestone, and fell face first into the swamp. And with that, my pack came up to my head, and I turned with my stick to stab whatever was grabbing onto my leg, because I was petrified. And when I looked up, what it was a vine. And on the end of the vine were big, deep thorns. The thorns had grabbed my leg, and the more I tried to pull, the deeper they dug into my leg. And at the other end of the vine was a palm frond that had died and fallen, and the vine was attached around that palm frond. And every time I tried to pull, I was pulling the entire tree with me. Of course, embarrassment hit me. I hadn't seen anybody all day, and my first thought was look around to see if anybody saw how stupid I was being, because I didn't want to be embarrassed, of course. And then realized what it was. I detached myself and moved on. But when I came to the alligator, the first thing I thought of was what had happened to me the day before. I had panicked when I thought I was being bit. So I stood still. I'd also studied alligators enough to know that what they do before they attack is they sit there and assess you to say, what's the best place to bite? You know, where can I get this meal the best? So I knew the longer I stood there, that was going to be a problem. By this time, the silt is settling. Because I still, at the first slide, I didn't know what was at my feet. But when I looked, if you look real close, can you see the ribs of his back? That's the alligator. His tail was up here, and this is the alligator. This is his neck. My foot is at this. His head's here. My feet are here. I was standing on him. I backed up 2 steps, side straddle hop 2 steps, worked around him. 4 more hours later, I came to one of the islands. When I got there was a little sign on the island, and the sign said, "Thank God Island." Yeah. And I said, well, never more appropriate than that sign. When I got over the interstate, I went into the Seminole Reservation. This fella was the size of the one I was dealing with, and they were sitting all along the trail. All right, this is the end, guys. This will be great. Machu Picchu, I went down to meet my daughter. It was an unbelievable time. This was the time that I started writing my stories. Cusco is the ancient city. It's surrounded by mountains. One day I decided that I was going to climb to the top of the mountain, and I was going to find and just see what was there. I climbed all day. I came to one false peak after another, kept on seeing false peaks. Finally, after about 4 hours, I made it to the top. At the top, the ridge was 3 feet wide, enough for goats to walk down. I got up there, I looked over the top, and beyond me were the Andes Mountains, all the way across as far as I could see. I was just unbelievable. It brought tears to my eyes to see what it was. I put my pack on top of the hill. I took a picture. 2 days later, my daughter and I went to Machu Picchu. Leave it there, Scott. We got there, and she said, "Dad, I'm not climbing to the top." If you've ever seen pictures of Machu Picchu, it's an ancient Incan city built in about 1450. And above it is another peak called Huayna Picchu, which I like it because it's named after me, Huayna Picchu, even though it's with an H. I climbed it by myself, and when I got up there, the cloud cover was so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. And the whole idea was to climb to the top and see the ancient city down below. So we were sitting up there, and everybody was sitting there on the rocks, and there had to be 20 different countries represented in that small area on top of that mountain. And everybody just sat down, tried to interact with one another. And all of a sudden, 2 guys jumped up onto a rock. And they were standing side by side. And they were going, "Gah, gah, gah, gah." I said, are they on drugs? What's going on? And everybody looked up, and a couple more guys got up there, and they said, "Ale, ale, ale." And more got up there, and ear, ear, ear. And finally, a couple British guys jumped up, and we're all kind of going, what is going on? And I got to looking, and the clouds were moving. Just barely were the clouds moving. And some Englishmen got up, and they said, "Go, go, go." Everybody was saying go in their own language, surrounded on top of that mountain. And the more everybody's sitting there, they're rocking back and forth in unison. I was just sitting there just fascinated by watching the entire world on top of this mountain telling the clouds to go. I was just carried away with it. I just stood there in awe. And suddenly the clouds broke away, and down below was the ancient city of Machu Picchu. Switchbacks, what you climb to get up there, rocks straight up. When the clouds disappeared, everybody started jumping up and down and screaming, and literally every person on top of that mountain hugged every other person. I'd never been hugged so many times in all my life by people from every part of the world. I thought, wow, this is amazing. You know, if everybody in the world hiked, they get along so well, we'd never have another war because everybody gets along. It was an unbelievable moment for me, and it's one of the reasons why I knew that I would always continue to hike. That is the area around Machu Picchu. So when I finish, go ahead, the next one. When I finish each section of the hike, I do what I call a touch. So if I'm doing one segment and I come back to do another segment, I cannot leave that hike without having touched the previous section. So if I walked one day and I stopped right here, I would mark it in my mind, and when I came back to hike the other way, I'd come back and put my toe on it and make sure I had no section that I hadn't touched on this entire hike. This was the moment that I connected the Appalachian Trail with the Florida Trail. I connected 2,193 miles to 1,500 miles. And so I managed to get myself off the ground. Not far, but I managed to do it. So this is a moment of completion. And that also is the moment of my presentation. For those of you who are interested, I do my stories on Facebook. And if you want to, it's listed as Wayne R. Garland. I use my middle initial. If you're interested, there's no cost, there's no advertisements.